Hello to everybody. I'm very happy that all of you are here. I hope we will have an exciting afternoon together. My name is Almut Sedelmeier. I'm working for the Danube office, and you also see my colleagues of Emebus, but I think all of you know us. My special thank you goes to our speakers for today. I'm very happy and grateful that we have Nick Thorpe and Wolf-Henning Petershagen with us. And I'm very much looking forward to this webinar about the Danube, its nature, culture, and history. As you all know, this webinar takes place within our project Danube Guides Action, is financed by the State Ministry of Baden-Württemberg. And this webinar is organized for our Danube Guides. So I would really like to invite you all to ask questions at any time. Now I will hand over to Sebastian Riem. He is the director of the Danube office, and I want to give him the opportunity to welcome you as well.
Yes, hello everybody, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of the Danube. It's my pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of the Danube office, Ulm and Neu-Ulm, to a wonderful and inspiring afternoon with our two well-known guests and experts, Nick Thorpe and Dr. Wolf-Henning Petershagen. It's really great that we managed to set up this webinar today with the help of our Danube network, and many thanks to everybody that was involved in the planning. I'm looking very much forward to dive into the Danube today, at least virtually, exchanging our ideas and points of view about that one miracle river that all unites and inspires us. I'm sure that we can all benefit from this exchange today, hoping that it will help us to spread the word about the Danube and its vast natural and cultural heritage. And by doing so, raising awareness for this gift and helping to protect our common treasure, especially for our network of Danube guides, the existing ones, but also the new ones. I'm sure this will be of high value. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to our afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Now, Nick, the stage is yours, and please introduce yourself at the beginning to our audience.
So, hello everyone. Very nice to see you all today. I think looking through the amazing sort of screen in front of me here, it looks like the sun is shining in quite a few of the countries you're in. Certainly in Serbia and Romania, as far as I can see, and in Germany, I think. So, yeah, very nice to meet you all. I'm sorry we can't meet in person. A few words about myself. I'm from England, from Britain originally. I've been living in Budapest within about 5 minutes walk of the Danube for 35 years now, dividing my time as a journalist, mostly for the BBC, with other perhaps more exciting things like traveling beside the river, writing books about it and making films about it. In 2012, 2011, 2012, I traveled the Danube for the first time, always upriver from the Delta, so from the Black Sea to the Black Forest. Although even then I discovered that there's a small village in the Danube Delta called Karaorman, which is an old Turkish name which means Black Forest. So already right at the beginning of my journeying on the Danube, I discovered that in fact the Danube flows from the Black Forest to the Black Forest, the Romanian Black Forest, upriver to the German Black Forest, or the other way around. Also, I wanted to mention right at the beginning that, oh yeah, I wanted to show you my book, first of all. This is it in English. It was actually published in 2015. It took me about 2 years to travel the Danube bit by bit and read it. It's since been published in various other languages. Here's the German edition, Die Donau. It's also very soon in Italian, in Polish, and in Hebrew so far. Very few people have the opportunity to travel a whole river, especially as long a river as the Danube, once in their lifetime. I've been very lucky to travel it twice, because last year, on the basis of the book, I had the opportunity to make a television series of 8 documentaries, each 46 minutes long, really retracing my steps up the river. So for most of last year, when the rest of Europe or the rest of the world was locked down and stuck in their living rooms, we managed somehow with a television crew to travel slowly upriver. Actually, it took us 10 months, though we weren't traveling the whole time, to film 8 series. And some extracts of those films I'd like to share with you today. Because I guess as guides yourselves, you must all know your section of the river, or perhaps your own country's section of the Danube pretty well. But what, in my experience, and please correct me if I'm wrong, or feel free to argue with this, but in my experience, people do know the bit of the river that they live next to pretty well. But when it comes to time away from their home, very few people travel up and down the river. Someone living in Smederevo in Serbia probably wouldn't think of going to the Iron Gates, less still to the Danube Delta for their summer holiday. Assuming we're free to travel in the summer, they might go, I don't know, to Montenegro, to the coast or something. Someone living in, I don't know, in Romania on the Iron Gates probably wouldn't go to the Delta for their holidays, or up to the Wachau in Austria. They'd probably go to the Black Sea coast. Someone living in Hungary wouldn't necessarily travel up to the Black Forest, to the source of the river. People seem to sort of cross the river all the time, looking up perhaps from their book or their mobile phone if they're crossing one of the bridges over the Danube in Budapest or in Belgrade, but they're in Bratislava or in Vienna, but they're not really traveling up and down it. Of course, the great exception are the cyclists. In my experience, there are always cyclists, long distance cyclists, many of them from Germany, of course, a few occasionally from my country, from Britain, many French and Italian people I've met on those journeys, but they seem to be the one exception of people that actually want to travel once in their life, to cycle the whole river. So I thought we're going to have a talk a bit later from Wolf-Henning, especially about Ulm, but from my knowledge also about that whole section and the whole importance of the Donauschachtel, these amazing boats that used to travel downriver mostly, bringing people and goods, but especially migrants, Germans repopulating countries which are today in Hungary, in Romania, in Serbia, after the Turkish wars, after the Ottoman occupation ended at the end of the 17th century. But so I thought I would kind of do what I can in the 45 minutes or so we've got available to talk about and show you bits of the whole Danube, to give you a sense of the Danube as a whole. And something I've noticed traveling up the river twice in my life is that the Danube has a particular personality. The more time you spend with the river, the more it actually becomes a person, often a person that's not looking at you or is not aware of you as a visitor to it or as a guide to it, but occasionally a personality which actually notices you there. And in my experience, without wishing to sound too romantic about it, one can have a lot of conversations with the river. And I think for me as a guide to the river through my book and through my films, and to you as guides to the river presumably for tourists or local people who come to spend time with you and get to know your section of the river, I think it's interesting, or it's useful to kind of introduce the Danube as a personality, as a person, often a female, I think. Obviously, it's Die Donau in German, but there's also, in my experience, sometimes quite a male, quite a masculine personality to the river. Also, the moods of the river, like a person, most of the time, the Danube is pretty calm, of course, but the Danube can get very angry. One of the films I'll show you a short extract from is from the tragedy on the river last year, sorry, in 2019, it's already 2 years ago, when a small tourist boat, the Mermaid, sank in the Danube in Budapest with the loss of 28 or 29 lives on that boat, mostly South Korean tourists. But that was a sort of reminder just of how quickly the river can change and how quickly it can become dangerous. Of course, people who live and work on the river know that pretty well. In the Delta, I spoke to fishermen who spoke often about the most frightening times for them, about the great fogs, which sometimes envelop the whole river. And when the river is not just a few hundred meters wide, as it is here in Budapest, where I'm speaking from now, but when it's several kilometers wide in flood, obviously, when you can't even see the end of your small fishing boat, it can become pretty dangerous. There's an international cemetery in Sulina, which has a section for all the people who sort of drowned in the Danube over the years. And it was particularly moving for me as an Englishman to see how many English people died in the Danube around about the 1860s, 1870s, mostly when boats collided in the river. Very rarely, actually, in times of conflict or war. Some of the gravestones have words like died as an effect from the effects of the climate. And of course, in the 19th century, there was still malaria and various other pretty serious diseases, which would probably make today's COVID seem pretty small fish. Another aspect of this personality of the Danube is the changing age of the river. Sometimes it can seem very young and playful as a river. Sometimes it can seem like a very old and very serious river. Other times, somewhere sort of stuck in middle age. And of course, as guides, we're introducing the river as a kind of personality, as a person to those we meet or take around it, but we're also mediating it through our own personalities. And so when people think back of their experience, their day by the river or their week by the river with us, I think they'll associate each of us individually with the river. So in a way, we're all giving the river a mouth and even a face. Maybe it's time to stop talking and share with you a little bit from one of the films. I hope technically this is going to work well. I'll play you first of all the introduction to the whole series of the river, just to give an attempt, a sort of illustration of what I was trying to do with the film series. See if this works.
For millions of years, the waters of Central and Eastern Europe have emptied into the Black Sea. From mountain streams and sluggish plains, they combined to form a great river known as the Danube. People fought on, fought over, and fought against it. It has been trapped, tapped, and channeled, but never completely tamed. My name is Nick Thorpe. For more than half my life, I've lived beside the Danube in Budapest. As the country of my birth, Great Britain, cuts loose from a Europe bruised by Brexit and cut by the coronavirus, I'm staying put. But I'm not staying still. I'm travelling against the flow. This is my journey up the Danube in search of the lost heart of Europe. It all begins in southeast Romania at the delta of the Danube. This is where the great river is split into 3 branches and reaches the Black Sea. Over millennia, the river and the silt from all the lands upstream through which it passes has created an astonishing landscape of rivers, lakes, tree-lined shores and reed beds. I've come here to witness how each life form in this wilderness survives, thrives and flies side by side, and how the people fit into that puzzle. They're a colourful bunch, descendants of priests and pirates, conjurers and conquerors, and strangers like me, who washed up here and liked it so much we decided not to leave.
So I hope you could see and hear that okay. Yep, good. Thank you, Sebastian. The film was made, as I said, over 10 months from January to October last year in the middle of the pandemic, but we still managed to travel a lot. And basically in each of the episodes, there are somewhere between 6 and 10, normally about 8 main characters. So in the course of 8 films, we've got about 64 main characters, kind of personalities who said something about the river. Obviously, starting in southeast Romania, it's a very poor part of Europe. And the characters that we found were mostly people, fishermen, people that one would expect to see around the river, especially fishermen. And I realized then, showing it to the commissioners of the film, that there was a kind of a danger that if we presented the same kind of characters through Southeast Europe or Eastern Europe, it might become quite repetitive. So we started to look for, as we traveled upriver, a wider variety of characters. Obviously, Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe suffers a great deal from emigration, people traveling away. As we moved up the river, we looked more and more for, sort of people less like a kind of stereotype of who one's expecting. Colorful people, there are musicians in it. There's a wine grower, for example, from Niculițel, close to the delta near Tulcea, and other characters. We visited the lepers colony in Tihilești. We visited wind turbines in the Dobrogea region and so on, going up. Obviously we were planning the series quite well in advance because traveling, it would have been irresponsible to travel with a film crew of 5 people if one didn't know what one was supposed to do each day. But we were also trying to leave open the possibility of spontaneity at every point to meet people and to bring into the film people we met on the way. The next extract I'd like to show you is from one of the children that we met and who became one of the main characters of the film. This is still from episode 1 in the Danube Delta.
Watching them unload their catch, I feel I'm part of a drama reenacted day and night between fish, birds and man within the fragile ecosystem of the Danube Delta. Everyone plays their part. The men bring in the fish by the barrow load. Their wives prepare the lunch, while the kids kick a ball. There are skills and goals galore in a game which never ends but is often interrupted. On my first day here, I met Andrei, my first friend in Sfântu Gheorghe.
Tell me something about yourself. Who are you?
I have 10
years. 10 years old. Oh, okay,
yeah.
very good. And this is your grandfather and grandmother?
Yeah, I love this air. I love this oxygen. It's very clear.
Your English is very good.
Yeah, thanks.
You had a good teacher?
No, I learn English from games.
From games?
Not from
really?
school.
Okay. And your mum and dad, where are they?
On Italy. I have no mom, sorry.
No mum.
I have a dad.
And your dad is in Italy now?
Yeah,
He's working there?
He's working on boats.
When do you see him?
On summer.
Just in the summer?
Yeah.
And Christmas time?
No.
Not
I
at
did
Christmas.
See it.
Really? So it's a long time without him?
Yes. It's a long time. He's not come here to visit me.
No.
Andrei's story is not unusual. Across Eastern Europe, a whole generation is growing up without their parents. They went upriver into Europe in search of wealth this village can no longer provide. Because not long ago, there was a way to get rich in Svantu George by catching a certain fish which granted every fisher family's wishes. The Svantu George mouth of the Danube has been the underwater gateway for the sturgeon, migrating upriver from the Black Sea for thousands of years. The beluga sturgeon can grow up to 10 meters long, weigh up to a ton, and live 100 years. Its eggs, black caviar, are one of the most sought-after animal products on Earth. But overfishing and the destruction of its habitat by river regulation and hydroelectric dams have driven several species of sturgeon to the brink of extinction. In 2006, sturgeon fishing was banned in Romania, and this village lost the hen that laid the golden eggs.
We're on our way now to meet Emil, a former sturgeon fisherman. He's going to show me how they used to catch them.
Emil's family has been fishing here for generations, sharpening their hooks and sharing their knowledge.
Ele se ascult, să dispară toată rugina de pe ele, iar vârful trebuie să fie ca vârful de ascuțit.
The sturgeon swims along the bottom of the river, so the best way to catch them is to fix a sort of fence into the bed of the river. As they swim through, wicked hooks catch in their sides. Lesser fish are now the staple diet. Emil's old hooks have rusted from neglect. He's only got them out now to show me the tricks of his former trade.
Drumul la mii de cărlige, chiar și 10.000 de cărlige. Sunt valuri, sunt curenți și plutele astea nu stau țapene așa. Ele se duc încolo, încoace, se joacă și atunci peștele când trece pe acolo, l-a agățat un cărlig. Îl oprește, el se zbate, se prinde în alt cărlig, se prinde în 3, 4, 5 cărlige, depinde cât este de mare cărligul. Iar oprindu-se în 2006 pescuit Sturgeon, ne-a pus să ne reorientăm spre alte unelte.
I still can't imagine how they could bring these giant fish ashore. A single big sturgeon could keep a family going for months. Its caviar could make them rich.
Hold it like that? No. Like that.
What?
Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay. So hold it like that. Yeah? And now in the...
Așa țipila.
It's already looking pretty sharp to me. I wouldn't like to be a sturgeon on the end of this.
Te duci de sus să jos.
Oh, okay. Further down.
Good. Can I see your hand?
Vrei să te urci cu noi? Stai. Hi, Andrei.
Hi, so cool.
This is your friend.
Hello, Sebastian. Hello. He is with me, and Nick,
I'm here
my
somewhere.
friend, he's with me.
Hi, Andrei. It's nice to walk with you in your town.
Yeah.
round and round in circles.
smoke on the horizon.
So there, as I said, one of the younger characters, one of the more kind of spontaneous meetings we had while we were making the film. Also, I wanted to introduce the sturgeon to you. Many people who've even lived beside the river all their lives have never even seen a sturgeon, because it's a fish which lives on the riverbed. Obviously, it lives most of the time in the Black Sea, and it migrates up the river, traditionally all the way almost to Vienna. Its favorite breeding grounds were the Szigetkez area of Hungary, near the city of Győr, and Zsitny Ostrov in Slovakia, these sort of very shallow area of many islands there. And obviously that was stopped by the Iron Gates, the building of the Iron Gates Dam in 1968 to 71. But I think it's important that as guides, you know a lot, as much as you can about the sturgeon. There are, you may have heard, there are plans to build either a fish lift or a fish stairway on the Iron Gates Dam. This now have the full support of the Romanian government, the Serbian government, and money from the European Union. They just need to solve technically how to do that, because various studies have shown that the sturgeon are still swimming all the way up the river to as far as the dam, trying to get through to their old spawning grounds in Hungary or Slovakia, but they're being stopped by the dam, obviously this 30-meter high wall of concrete. But with the authorities interested, at least, in doing that, there's various efforts to make the sturgeon part of the branding of the River Danube, just as the salmon, thanks to the improvements in the water quality of the River Rhine in Germany and the Netherlands have, and flowing between Germany and France, and of course from Switzerland, the salmon apparently now is part of the branding of the Rhine River, because the water quality is that much better now than it used to be, and so the sturgeon could one day, hopefully, in the next 10 years or so, become the kind of image for the Danube in different countries. Obviously, it's going to be difficult to solve that technically, how to encourage the fish to find the lifts or the ladder to get over that 30-meter high dam. And of course, there's the Danube 2, the Iron Gates 2 dam as well to get over. But if they could, another interesting fact about the sturgeon, as they can live to up to 100 years, there are still fish, the largest sturgeon in the river, who can remember how sturgeon like to spawn where they were born themselves. And therefore, there are still sturgeons swimming up as far as the Iron Gates Dam, hoping to spawn somewhere further upstream and turning back when they can't spawn at all anywhere, and not spawning somewhere in Bulgaria or Romania, but simply jettisoning their eggs, their caviar, in the Black Sea. So because they couldn't reach their original spawning grounds where they came from. And obviously, if they could, if you imagine a huge old 50, 60, 70-year-old, 80-year-old sturgeon that could make it, even just one fish were able to make it up to almost as far as Vienna and spawn there, a few fish could effectively repopulate or start to repopulate the whole of the Danube with sturgeon, of these 4 or 5 different kinds of sturgeon that haven't become extinct. So obviously poaching in the Delta is still a problem. Overfishing, poaching in the Black Sea is still a problem. The Iron Gates, though, seems to be the biggest scientific problem to the sturgeon re-inhabiting the river. The next extract I'd like to show you is from the Iron Gates, so you get a sense of the dam itself and that kind of obstacle. It's also, of course, the Iron Gates between Serbia and Romania. It's also one of the most picturesque, the most beautiful parts of the river, and well worth a visit to those of you not from Romania and Serbia, who maybe have never been there.
For hundreds of kilometers, the Danube forms the border between Bulgaria and Romania. But north of Vidin, Serbia takes over from Bulgaria as the river enters the spectacular Iron Gates Gorge. The massive hydroelectric dams were built here between communist Yugoslavia and Romania in the late 1960s, tapping the power of the river as it bursts through the narrow defile between the Carpathian and Balkan mountains.
You've been involved with this project for a long time.
I'm working here since 1989 when I finished the faculty. At that time it was somehow proud to be an engineer in Iron Gates 1. And this was something that I wanted since high school. I learned from those people at that time when I was engaged that this is the most important thing to work on such a project, on such a hydropower system. Everyone was proud of that, and this feeling I'm still having, and I wanted to transfer to the next generation somehow.
Someone came with a project like this today. Do you think the project would get permission?
It should get permission. It was very difficult to navigate in the Iron Gates gorges.
Because they're so narrow and the water...
Narrow. It was during the high water season, mostly it was very difficult. So it was really necessary for the development of the society to have navigation in this Iron Gates area.
But the cost of the dam was very high for the communities living either side of and even in the middle of the Danube. A whole world disappeared beneath the waters, which rose 30 meters upstream of Iron Gates 1. Fragments of it are preserved in constant hearing of the hum of the turbines. So this is the museum of the hydro power station, and strangely there's an exhibition here dedicated to the island of Adakale. So here we are in the belly of the beast, if you like, and there's an exhibition dedicated to an island that was destroyed by the hydro power station. Adakale, a taste of the Orient, of Turkish culture now lost beneath the waves. It was famous for its Turkish sweets, its pistachios, figs and pomegranates, for the tall cypress trees beside the minaret in the graveyard, for its Muslim saint and protector Mishkin Baba, and even for the tobacco factory. Its disappearance has left a hole in the heart of the Danube that no quantity of water can fill. Other people are sent into exile on islands. These two were sent into exile from it when Adakale was destroyed. Number 68. This is where Engor and his wife Niorara, some of the last survivors from the island of Adakale, live. I think they're expecting me.
Am părăsit insula Adakale la vârsta de 27 de ani.
Când am terminat liceul, nu m-a lăsat să stau vagabondă și m-am angajat la fabrica de țigări la insulă.
Eu am observat că a venit o fetiță frumoasă, blondă și la noi la Adakale și n-am mai știut cum să fac. Când ați sărutat-o prima dată pe doamna? Și am povestit. Am fost la un dans împreună și fiind îmbrățișați, am ieșit și afară, ne-am îmbrățișat și afară și imediat a urmat primul sărut.
Tango ne plăcea cel mai mult, și mie și lui. Da. Stăteam îmbrățișați, ne mai vorbeam la ureche, mai ne sărutam. Și așa ne-am împrietenit mai ca lumea.
They and others I've met who once lived on this island still dream that they're walking on the streets and everything still is as it once was.
Eu în Orșova am fost angajat la un restaurant, cafegiu. Și de la restaurant m-au trimis și la primărie la o recepție cu primul ministru al țării, a fost o ședință mare și am servit cafea. Atunci s-a întâmplat episodul ăsta că prim-ministru era domnul Manea Mănescu, a spus că dacă nu vor ca să părăsească locuințele, dăm drumul la apă peste ei și pleacă ca șobolani. N-au încotro.
How did you feel in your heart when you overheard that conversation? Were you angry? Were you sad? Did you want to throw the coffee in their faces? How did you feel when you heard that?
Puteam să fac, am înghițit în sec. Asta e, n-ai ce face, nu poți să... Nici acum nu mai poți să faci nimica. Tot aia e. Tot ei ce vor, aia face. Nu e.
So, the island of Adicale, obviously the loss of the island of Adicale is one of the most sort of spectacular things, and not just the island itself, but all the villages up and down the river there. Certainly for anyone with any sort of historical memory of the island, or many people alive who still have childhood memories of visiting it, obviously it's a very emotional issue. Another aspect of the river that I wanted to touch on today is the, as I said before, the accident in 2019, in May 2019, because many people perhaps now associate the Danube with the loss of simply because it was filmed as it happened, of the small tourist boat, the Mermaid, the Hoblein. I'd show a small extract from that, and also because one of the sort of heroes of the Danube, one of the characters that we found in Hungary to illustrate that, was one of the divers who was involved in trying to salvage the boat and getting people out of the water when the accident first happened. Try and do a bit of that.
A team of divers is on duty on the Danube 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Attila Barci is one of the oldest and most experienced.
Figyelemváltás, vigyázz! Jó reggelt kívánok! Pihenj, szolgálat a mai nap. Egyes fecskendő, Deme Ádám főtörzsőrmester. Értem, egyes. Búvár Szeren, merülésvezető, Bárci Attila főhadnagy. Értem, merülésvezető. Figyelemváltás, vigyázz! Átadás átvételre oszolj.
Ez egy ilyen tipikus szoba, ahol időnk egy nagy részét töltjük. Ez például az én ágyam itt, a mai napon.
Igen. És ezek mind a Dunából?
Mind a Dunából. Gyakorlatok során. Ez a darab például a régi Margit hídból.
Az a Margit hídból, igen. 19.
Ez
századnak a vége?
Ez a lebombázott Margit hídnak a része, igen, amit most újra korlátként megcsináltak.
Aha. És tele van akkor a Duna ilyesmivel?
Mindennel. Eleve mi így megyünk le, és így is készülünk fel. Bár van, amikor a Duna a szebbik arcát mutatja, és akkor akár fél méter, 1 méteres látótávolságunk is lehet. Szia, Bárci Attila vagyok. Tudnánk nyomni egy gyakorlatriasztást búvárra? Ezen a jó, a rossz és a csúfból.
Figyelem, próbariasztás.
Búvár.
ilyenkor már szaladunk is.
Aha.
És itt lecsúszunk. És szorítjuk a csövet, kicsit letudjuk rajta. Ezt megint kezdjük. Sajnos nem tudunk úgy segíteni sokszor, ahogy a klasszikus bévácsos vízimentés. Nekünk sajnos már az siker sokszor, ha egy eltűnt személynél a család számára már a holttestet át tudjuk adni. De nagyon ritkán előfordul olyan, amikor úgy tudunk segíteni, hogy valódi életet tudunk menteni, és az minden inkább vége. Aha.
Looks pretty easy in the day, summertime, but going to have harder it can be in driving rain in the dark with the Danubian flood in a real situation. Mit jelent a Duna neked személyesen?
Az életem során megváltozott. Gyerekkoromban horgászatokat, lejöttünk a Dunához megnézni a hajókat, de amióta tűzoltó búvár vagyok, azóta általában hát valami, ahogy mi hívjuk, káresetet. Nekem a Duna azt az igazi romantikáját a sajnos elvesztette. Tudok sétálni úgy itt a családommal, hogy azt mondom, de szép, és milyen szép a főváros látképe a Dunáról, de utána meglátok egy pontont, vagy egy hidat, és akkor azért csak bedevillan egy esemény.
Ebből a hajóból egyetlen egy van Magyarországon, ezért aztán vonultatható az egész magyarországi vízterületen, arra van építve, hogy egy másik hajón keletkezett tüzet tudja eloltani. Ennek megfelelő teljesítményű szivattyú van beépítve, 2 vízágyú van a tetején, illetve tudunk róla szerelni 12 darab vízsugarat. A káreseteinknek a túlnyomó része ennek nem tűz, hanem műszaki mentés. Különböző kisebb, nagyobb hajókkal történő balesetek, ütközések, másik nagy kategória ugye az életmentés, a vízbe esett személyeknél mentést, vagy esetleg eltűnt személyeknél megkeresést hajtani végre.
This ship was on duty in May 2019 when a tragic accident happened on the Danube within sight of the Parliament. A tourist boat, the Mermaid, was crushed beneath the bow of a giant passenger cruise ship. Of the 35 people on board, mostly South Korean tourists, only 7 survived.
A riasztást azt úgy kaptuk, hogy a hajóbaleset, az egyik hajó ütközött a másikkal, és a nagy hajó víz alá nyomta a kis hajót.
Egy elég borzalmas kép fogadott bennünket, mentő, gyűrűk, székek úsztak a Dunán. Kezdtük érezni, hogy ez egy nagyon komoly helyzet. Egy olyan baleset, ami a Duna történetében, vagy a Duna életében is egy nagyon kiugró, egy nagyon kiemelkedő baleset. Nagyon mostoha körülmények voltak, sötét volt, szakadt az eső, erős szél volt, és ezt mind megtetézte még az, hogy a Dunának az állása a mostani jelenleginél is sokkal magasabb volt. Kimondott búvár merülést nem lehetett végrehajtani. Amit mi elsődlegesen elkezdtünk, és azt meg tudtuk csinálni, hogy a felszínen lévő, bajban lévő embereknek az úgymond vízi mentését el tudtuk kezdeni. És így történt az a szerencsétlen találkozás, és itt a Margit híd, meg tulajdonképpen a pillérei között süllyedt el a hajó, és olyan hamar elsüllyedt, hogy szinte itt maradt végig egészen a kiemelésig.
Most, ahol vagyunk most.
Igen.
Milyen volt itt bemenni a vízbe a következő napok és hetekben?
A látás az szinte nulla, ilyenkor abszolút a búvára, a kezére, a tapogatón, tehát abszolút úgy kell elképzelni.
Csak kézzel.
Igen, abszolút úgy kell elképzelni,
az
mintha vak lenne. Igen. Nagyon erős sodrás, bármilyen apró mozdulat a búvára olyan veszélyt jelenthet, hogy a víznek az ereje szinte ugyanúgy eldobja őt is. Nagyon nehéz volt már csak a hajó roncsra lemenni, megközelíteni, ahol a holttesteknek a keresése és kiemelése megkezdődhetett. Minden egyes embernek a kiemelése az óriási kockázattal járt a búvárok számára is.
Hogy tudod utána kezelni azt, amit átapasztaltál?
Próbáljuk az ilyen úgymond káresetek után egyrészt a személyes érintettséget próbáljuk ebből teljesen kivenni. Igazából az a jó, hogyha idézőjelben gépként dolgozunk és csináljuk a munkánkat. Az egy nehéz vonal, amikor ezt nem tudjuk tökéletesen kizárni. És mondjuk egy ilyen esetnél egy személyes ruhadarabra, vagy egy használati tárgyra téved a tekintetünk, és onnantól kezdve azonnal egy ilyen személyes történet indulna el egy cipőnél, egy pólónál, amit akár a mindennapokban akármelyikünk használ. És akkor óhatatlanul bevillan az, hogy itt egy élet most véget ért. Én reggel úgymond, mikor leadom a szolgálatot, leteszem a terheket, akkor én hazamegyek Pilis-Szent Lászlóra, és ott tulajdonképpen kimosódik belőlem ez a dolog. Megölelem a családomat, és onnantól kezdve egy teljesen új nap indul, egy teljesen más élet kezdődik. Ez nagyon sokat segít nekem.
Stretch along the neck of the Danube above Budapest like the mane of a horse. The thickly forested slopes hide many secrets.
Can you, sorry, the sound of the film still is continuing. Can you still hear it? You can. I need to somehow stop that just a moment.
The monks found their own way to come.
Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. Yes, there was a serious story from the Danube and a sort of less romantic one. It was important also just to remember the kind of dark side of the river. One of my early ideas of what to call the book was to call it the Dark River, because there are so many dark stories associated with the river. It's easy to get carried away with the romance of the Danube. But that's true. But though, of course, it also has its own positive sides of sort of heroism or bravery of the divers involved. Also, it was interesting for me, most people I met on the journey were always regarding the Danube as a place where they came and sort of to get rid of their own worries. The Danube acts as a fantastic consolation for all the peoples living beside or near it or who visit it, rather as the sea does in my own country. People just going down to sit and beside the river and let it sort of wash their cares away, just as we do in Britain, walking down to the sea coast. But in this case, interestingly, with Attila Barzi, the diver there, because his own work is so much associated, as he said, with the sort of dark side of the river, taking bodies and dealing with accidents in it, that he gets away from the Danube in order to relax and to go up into the hills where he lives. Just to cheer you up, we've got a little bit more time. Maybe I'd show you just one more short film, a 5-minute film, before we go to questions. Just about climate change. You know, here we are on Earth Day being celebrated around the world. President Biden has announced today, just an hour or so ago, that the United States will respect, or indeed will cut, I think, its emissions to half of what they were in the year 2005. So sort of we see the United States rejoining global efforts to limit climate change. Obviously, climate change was something I looked at different points of the river and something you'll be asked about as well, no doubt. I thought I'd just show you one section from one story, one character, a very interesting guy who's both in the book and in the film series. Just to finish with now, He's called Josef Fischer. He's a fisherman, or rather he's a wine grower in the Wachau region in Austria. And he also has a particularly interesting hobby, shall we say, which is closely connected to climate change. And then after that, let's go to some questions.
After a few days in Vienna, it's a relief to get out into the real Austrian countryside. Here in the Wachau, where the Danube's carved out path through gentle rolling hills like something out of the Shire in Lord of the Rings. I've met so many people in transition in the city. Here I'm going to meet an old friend, Josef Fischer, whose roots are deep in this landscape. And his feet, though, are also in the River Danube. The Wachau is one of Austria's most celebrated white wine regions, famous for its dry Riesling and Grüne Veltliner grapes.
Das ist eigentlich bei was? Ein Riesling. Also der zum Beispiel hat ein bisschen Restzucker.
In Grossatz, Josef Fischer is both a successful winemaker and someone who cares more than most about his namesake.
Sehr viele Fische. Wels, Huchen, Regenbogen. Und Regenbogenforelle.
Genau, ja.
Puh, das ist schön.
Und leider keine großen Huchen,
ja,
aber dafür große Welse.
Ja. Woher kommt diese Leidenschaft vor?
Der Grund ist eigentlich mein Großvater gewesen, wie ich ein kleiner Bub war. Hat er mir damals erzählt von den großen Fischen, die er 1920 war das, hat er ein paar Leute gerudert und die haben große Fische gefangen, große Huchen gefangen, bis 30 Kilo. Und das hat mich halt fasziniert, wie ich so ein kleiner Bub war.
Ja.
Es ist das letzte Verbreitungsgebiet. Ganz früher ist er bis Wien vorgekommen. Jetzt wäre er noch möglich in der Wachau.
Wie lange haben Sie diese Fische nicht gegessen?
Ich habe oft schon manchmal Fische gegessen, aber ich habe noch nie einen Fisch wegen Essen getötet. Ich habe, wenn er blind geworden ist oder irgendwie zu Tode gekommen ist, dann habe ich sie auch natürlich gegessen, weil man sie ja sinnvoll verwerten sollte. Aber ich habe nie in meinem Leben einen Huchen, weil ich ihn essen wollte, getötet.
Warum nicht?
Weil ich andere Zugang zu diesen Fischen habe. Das ist wie Pferd oder wie Hund, wenn man das so versteht. Ich kann sagen, dass ich eigentlich mit 22 Jahren begonnen habe, mich für diese Fische sehr intensiv zu interessieren. Ich habe die ersten Huchen in der Badewanne gehältert.
Jedes Jahr oder fast jedes Jahr, Sie bringen Fische von hier vom Teich in die Donau.
Ja, also ich mache das hauptsächlich ehrenamtlich, also ich bekomme dafür nichts bezahlt. Es ist so, dass mir das eben wirklich was bedeutet, dass in der Donau eben Huchen ein bisschen in einer größeren Dichte vorhanden wären. Und jetzt besetze ich halt da jedes Jahr einige tausend Huchen, um halt einfach die Population ein bisschen zu unterstützen.
So habe ich nie einen Fisch gesehen. So von drinnen.
Vorne.
Oha!
Da ist er.
Dieser. So slippery and so strong. And which one? This one?
Na, der vorne und hinten, schau, siehst du? Dann kann man ausgleichen.
Ja.
Siehst du?
Ja, also mit zwei Händen.
Ja.
I wonder if it's going to succeed. Sorry.
Ja, genau, super.
I think that's the first time since I started travelling up the Danube that I've actually caught a fish.
Josef is so fond of these fish, he puts their portraits on his wine. The Danube salmon is dying out because of dams and climate change. He's trying to save them.
I'm going to release now the first two back into the River Danube. And they're gone.
Sie wohnen ein ganzes Leben hier bei der Donau. Was bedeutet die Donau für Sie?
Es ist eben ein sehr großer Fluss, sehr mystisch. Und man erlebt hat, wie hoch er werden kann, wie groß das Wasser sein kann, dann fühlt man sich ganz klein. Und das ist glaube ich, ein wichtiger Ort im Leben, dass man manchmal auch klein sein kann. Das ist ein grüner Veltliner Smaragd. 14 Alkohol.
Ja.
Ja.
Also ziemlich stark.
Ja, ist schon ein besserer Wein da. Ja.
Okay, a slightly lighter story to finish the extracts from the film with. That's pretty much the end of the presentation. Just one thought I had before I sort of hand over to questions, which is that we'll talk more about this, I think, in the discussion with Henning later on, but this sense of how the Danube links us all, I think that there was quite an interesting development in the 1920s. A Hungarian writer called Oskar Jászai suggested that there actually be a country called the Danubian Federation, a country made up of all the countries, the nations, the countries bordering the river. I think at the time, the Romanians didn't like the idea. It sounded like an idea after the Treaty of Trianon it might be a trick by the Hungarians to recreate Greater Hungary. I think the Serbs didn't like the idea because they were then happy in the new kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, the new what became Yugoslavia. The Slovaks didn't like the idea because they were happy at that point in Czechoslovakia. So the idea was never actually came to anything of a Danubian Federation. But I do feel now in the 21st century, there's no need to change any borders, but perhaps all of us who as guides or for whatever reason are dealing with the Danube, I think one can in a sense create a Danubian Federation in our own hearts, that even if we can't make a country, perhaps we could make a WhatsApp group or find some way of communicating with one another. So I would really encourage you all as guides to establish contact with each other sort of laterally using the different technologies available and to share experiences. And if such a group were to be created, I'd be very happy to be in it as well. And on that note, that's pretty much what I had to say this afternoon.
May I ask Wolf-Henning to take over and I'll share the presentation. And Henning, please introduce yourself again in the beginning.
Yeah, I'm Henning Petershagen. I'm a retired journalist, but as historian and cultural scientist, I'm still investigating history, local history in the first rank. And so my theme is, well, part of the local history and not so widespread than the part of Nick. Well, in Ulm, three rivers meet. That's the wrong picture. Yes, that's it. Here you see the three rivers. That's the Danube, the Iller, which comes from the Alps, and the Blau. So in Ulm, enough water comes together that formerly the Danube was considered navigable from Ulm on. At last, this was true until the end of the 19th century, when the wooden ships with a load capacity of up to 440 tons were still transporting goods from Ulm to Budapest. This type is called Ulmer Schachtel. Maybe you heard about Ulmer box, it means, which originally was a ridiculous name. But it has been a well-established designation long before this. But for modern freight ships, the Upper Danube is too small. The European major waterway opens in Kelheim, just before Regensburg. Next picture, please. Yes, here you see that's Kelheim. the Danube and well, in Kelheim, the Danube has been connected to the Rhine-Main-Donau Canal in 1992. And since then, like I told you, here, the European major waterways opens here. The distance from Ulm to the mouth of the Danube into the Black Sea measures 2,586 kilometers. The distance from Ulm to Kelheim is 171 kilometers. On these 171 kilometers, there has been no commercial shipping for over 100 years, except of smaller excursion boats. Still going on, however, are the journeys of the present-day Ulmer Schachtel. Since the beginning of the 20th century, these descendants of the historic Ulm ships have permanently maintained contacts with people and communities along the Danube. Please, the next picture. Yes, you see this stamp, an Austrian stamp from the year 1954. It shows that the Ulmer Schachtel has become a symbol of international integration. Furthermore, today's Ulm boxes, we currently have 6 of them, remind us of the traditional Ulm Danube navigation, which forms a very important aspect in the urban economic history. And finally, the Ulm boxes are a central element of urban folklore, which you will encounter everywhere as you walk through Ulm, for example, at the south gable of the Ulm Town Hall. Here you can see it. In the announcement of my presentation, I claimed that Ulm could illustrate the statement that the Danube is one of Europe's lifelines. In fact, it has been an important lifeline of Ulm before the railway was invented, and even a few decades later, not only because people ate the fish caught in the Danube. In the first half of the 19th century, 2/3 of the commercial goods passing through Ulm were transported on the Danube. At this time, freight transport had already assumed global dimensions. Coffee from Brazil made its way through the English and Dutch seaports to Ulm, where it was loaded onto the wooden cargo vessels, which finally transported the coffee to Vienna. And when in 1857, the bankruptcy of the Ohio Life Insurance Company in New York provoked a global depression, this had an impact on the Ulm-Danube trade, which also depended on international customs policy. The Danube trade can be traced back to Ulm as early as the 12th century. We know, for instance, that in the Austrian Danube city of Enns, that's near Linz, long-distance dealers from Ulm are documented in 1164. This picture is here from the 18th century in the Museum of Enns, shows an Ulmer Schachtel, as you can recognize by the flag with the Ulm colors, black and white. Among the goods shipped on the Danube in the 12th century were scarves from Northwest Europe, as well as skins, furs and wax from Russia. In other words, goods were also transported upstream the Danube. These ships were usually pulled by horses, mostly from Bavaria to Ulm. It was a murderous job with a high risk for the personnel. Have you ever driven through the Weltenberg Strait? Next picture, please. Yes, here you see the Weltenberg Strait. Then try to imagine how you can tow ships upstream there without shoreways. It will overwhelm your imagination. The transports of goods and passengers were initially carried out from Ulm on rafts. The wood for this came down the Iller from the Allgäu. But at the end of the 16th century, the climate changed. The Little Ice Age began and led to a shortage of wood. The trade on the Danube was carried out by the Ulm Fishermen's Guild. One of the main goods was wine, because Ulm had by far the largest wine market at that time. So it was a wine merchant from the Fishermen's Guild who brought shipbuilders from Bavaria to Ulm in 1570. They showed the fishermen in Ulm how to build big transport ships. These were already 22 meters long and about 3 meters wide, even then. This picture here shows the oldest plan drawing of an Ulm Danube ship from around 1630. This ship type is called Zille, regardless of its size. The great ones who brought people and goods to Vienna were called Wiener Zillen, because they went to Vienna. As I already told you, its current name is Ulmer Schachtel, was originally a disrespectful term which has been used in the Stuttgart Parliament to mock the Ulm-Danube navigation. The term Ordinary Schiff refers to the schedule. Since 1712, these Zillen sailed ordinary, that means according to a timetable, to Vienna and at precisely defined fares. The journey lasted 8 to 14 days, depending on the water level. This Ordinary Wiener Schiff had a good reputation because the Ulm shipmen were considered very reliable, and the journey by ship was safer and more comfortable than the land route, apart from a few problematic sites, as you can see in the next picture. The most dangerous place between Ulm and Vienna were the rapids and the vortex near Krain in Austria in the Wachau. At low water, the rapids rose, and at high tide, the whirl endangered the ships. Usually, there were about 40 people on board, but sometimes more. For example, on the emigrant ships. They went to Vienna or Hungary with 100 to 150 people. We even know about transports of up to 250 passengers. This picture here is in a church in Satmar, Romania. It is a reminiscent of the emigration on the Ulm ships. Here too, you can see the Ulm flag on the right side. The first known large immigrant train started in 1712 from Ulm to Hungary. This was after the Turks there had been defeated. In the year 1786, 3,000 immigrants boarded the ships in Ulm in only 3 months. As times were rough, they hoped for a better life in southeastern Europe, but mostly in vain. Better life was usually granted starting the second or third generation. These immigrants were later called Danube Swabians, even if they were not Swabians at all. But their great journey just began in Swabia, in Ulm. For their descendants, the Ulmer Schachtel is an essential symbol of their history, their identity. And the importance of this symbol is constantly growing. Here you see different Schachtel monuments. Since the turn of the millennium, several Schachtel monuments have been created in Hungary. Previously, they had been smaller in size, like in these pictures. But 2 years ago, in 2019, the Danube Swabians in the Hungarian city of Baja built a gigantic one, a 21-meter long and 5-meter wide walk-in museum, followed by a history trail. Here you see it. So the immigrants were a temporary but extremely sustainable group of customers to the Ulm shipmen. However, their immigration was only possible after their new settlements were liberated from the Turks. This was done, among others, with the help of the troops of the Swabian Imperial Circle, in German Schwäbischer Reichskreis. In Ulm, these troops boarded the ships and rafts that took them to Hungary. In 1667, for example, Ulm shipmen carried 2,500 soldiers. We have a picture of the year 1684. Read the next picture. Yes. I divided it in two, so you can see, you can recognize the ships. I hope so. I don't know in what size you can see the picture on your screens. Well, this picture is showing the embarkation of the troops of the Swabian Imperial Circle, who also moved from Ulm to Hungary. A later transport of troops, which the Duke of Württemberg brought to the water in 1758, consisted of 6,000 men, 150 horses, 226 wagons on 57 ships and 70 rafts. More peaceful was the fleet of 34 ships in 1745, which the shipbuilders in Ulm had constructed in less than 3 weeks. 34 ships in 3 weeks. They brought the imperial couple Francis I and Maria Theresia and their entourage safely back to Vienna after Franz had been crowned Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in Frankfurt. The Ulm sailors were rewarded by the ruling couple for their outstanding performance, among other things with a medal to their gilt cup. Here you see this medal, backside and foreside, and right above there's the gilt cup of the Fisherman's Guild. But such trips were more of an exception. The standard was the flow of goods. Here you see the harbor of Ulm, end of 18th century, and maybe you can recognize the barrels there. I already talked about the traditional transport of wine. In 1571, for example, the Danube customs officer of Straubing in Bavaria recorded an annual volume of 22,000 buckets of wine. One bucket had about 60 liters, which came almost exclusively from Ulm. Other barrels contained Roman snails. Up to 200,000 pieces were sent to Vienna for Lent, means the time between Carnival and Easter. One of Ulm's main exports was the canvas until the 19th century. The freight changed with the needs, which depended on the economic and technical development. In the late 18th and 19th century, only a small part of the goods came from Ulm. Most were transit goods. From France came a part of the wine, from the Black Forest the wooden cuckoo clocks. The cheese came from Vorarlberg and Switzerland, Vorarlberg in Austria. The tobacco from the Palatinate, the coffee, as I already said, from overseas. The industrialization was also noticeable in the transport goods. The proportion of dyes and chemicals became richer and more differentiated during the 19th century. The share of metal goods increased. These were, for example, the blouse of the, no picture before, please. Yes, the blouse of the Ulm company Eberhard, but also big machines such as entire locomotives were shipped. An irony of history is that the Ulm ships even transported the railway tracks down the Danube, which significantly contributed to the cessing of the Ulm-Danube shipping. In addition to goods and people, cattle were also shipped to Austria. The cows were driven from Switzerland to Ulm, where 20 of them fit on one ship. In the final phase of the Ulm-Danube shipping, asphalt was the main transport asset. It came from French Switzerland and was taken on the Ulm ships to Vienna and Budapest, where it was needed for the road construction. For this, however, ships of a much higher load capacity were necessary. These, in turn, could only be used after the Danube had been straightened, channeled, as it used to be very meandering before. Here on this picture you can see as a bright stripe the straightened the channel Danube and in snake lines around its original course. In addition, the shippers permanently had to struggle with low water level, and after the construction of the new bridges, they couldn't pass bridges if the water was too high. By 1870, the Danube from Ulm to Vienna was straightened enough that the ships could become larger, wider, and more sustainable. The last commercial Ulmer Schachtel that left Ulm in April 1897, next picture please, was 30 meters long. Oh no, that's the wrong picture before, please. Oh, well, I see I left one out. Yeah, but this last Ulmer Schachtel was 30 meters long, 8 meters wide, and could load 200 tons. But there were even more, no, that's wrong, later. But there were even more sustainable ones. The year prior, 5 ships had been constructed which could carry an incredible 440 tons each. This, of course, did not change the fact that the time of the Ulm transport ships was over. Attempts to sail the Danube as far as Ulm by steamship, that's the picture for steamships, failed miserably in the mid-19th century. This ship you can see in the picture had nothing but problems with the low water, and soon it had to be sold. There were plans to make the Danube navigable as far as Ulm, with a canal connection from Ulm to Lake Constance, Bodensee, and another via the Swabian Alp to the Neckar near Plochingen. But these plans were finally buried in the 1970s. With the end of commercial shipping, however, the lifeline Danube was now by no means desolate. Less than 10 years later, a small group of Ulm citizens set off for Vienna on a used working Zille. Ah, that was a picture from the last Schachtel. Yeah, they're mixed up. Okay, so next picture, please. Here you see this group of Ulm citizens in 1906. And this was the beginning of the touristic Ulm Danube navigation, which indeed can be operated only to a relatively small extent. In 1914, the Ulm Association for Tourism began a tradition that continues to this day. Next picture, please. It organized a Schachtel journey, which not only served the pleasure of travel, but also the maintenance of tradition and contact along the Danube. Here you see about 30 men of the Ulm Association for Tourism. This objective should continue to be pursued. However, this caused a different way of dealing with the ships. Before, they had been built for a one-way use. Since the return transport would have been too expensive, these ships were sold at their arrival in Vienna. Now, the ship was designed in such a way that it could be transported back by rail. Next picture, please, or by truck today. In addition, more and more power plants were built between Ulm and Vienna. They withdrew energy from the Danube, which had to be fed back to the ships. Therefore, the ships were given engines and have gained considerable comfort over the last 100 years. One of the most important advantages is the kitchen, with a cooling and tapping system for beer. However, to conserve nature, trips down the Danube down to Kelheim by motor ships is very limited. A voyage with the Ulmer Schachtel therefore requires a lot of permits, which restricts those journeys to 1 per year. Nevertheless, the Schachtel has driven the entire Danube from Ulm to kilometer 0 on the Black Sea. As already mentioned, the Ulmer Schachtel is a central element of Ulm folklore. And so it also plays an important role on Ulm's national holiday, the Oath Monday. On this day, the mayor of Ulm, you see him right above, picture right, following a centuries-old legal custom, swears from the balcony of the Ulm Schwörhaus, Oath House, to care for all citizens equally. In the afternoon, the Danube is the scene of a carnivalesque water show called Nahbade, that means swimming down. The Ulm boxes also participate in this. In this case, their freight are local and regional celebrities. At the other great Ulm City Festival, the Fisherman's Jousting Tournament, which only takes place every 4 years, the big Zillen serve as changing rooms for the costumed combatants. This is not as spectacular, but it's useful. In this case, the small Zillen replace the horses for the tournament. With that, we ended up with a completely different aspect of the Lifeline Danube, with a cultural one. As you have seen, it plays a decisive role in the Ulm City Festivals, and in their battle cry, the people of Ulm define themselves by their heraldic bird, the sparrow, and their connection with the Danube. It reads, Ulmer Spatze, Wasserratze, hoi hoi hoi. That means Ulm sparrows are water rats. The photo proves it. Thank you.